All right. Hi. Welcome back to my channel, Modern Mysticism, where we explore the connections between modern science and mysticism, or spiritual ideas in today's era. I wanted to do a video on how you often hear spiritual people, mystics, who are into the new age typically say things like, you got to raise your vibration or increase your frequency. And I wanted to analyze how that is actually very sound advice and how you could actually utilize this yourself to get yourself through any difficult situations or actually align yourself in ways that benefit yourself spiritually and physically. So, to begin, I think we need to understand what is a vibration. And the best way to look at this is to look at the entire universe, at least as we interact with it, as a series of excitations or agitated space that are trying to find equilibrium. And what that actually means is that when you're looking at our reality in totality, it suggests that what we call the electron is actually a just like a agitation in space that's moving along a set circuit or a set path. And that agitation, just like its base state of the universe, the fabric it exists with on, or as I like to think of it, the canvas of reality. That excitation or that electron is trying to find equilibrium so it can return to stillness. And the way this happens is through vibration or frequencies. And frequency is the way to say how fast is that vibration moving in relationship to other things around it. So you can think of it as like a circle, and every time that circle completes, that's one cycle or one frequency. Building on that, when we understand that this excitation is trying to return to stillness, we need to look at points in which stillness actually exists within the universe. And you'll find that at the center of pretty much everything, whether that be the center of an atom in its nucleus, or the still point inside of a torsion field, the geometry that describes the path of the electron as it moves around the absolute center or the center point of whatever is moving around. You can even see this in galaxies, in planets, in stars. They all have a central point in which energy is constantly moving around, reaching, and then inverting and coming out the other side. This cyclical pattern is what maintains matter in our reality. And with that, I think it's a good idea to look at how this vibration is trying to find that center point so it can return back to stillness, and then from that stillness, return back into vibration or different frequencies of agitation. So think of it like this. Imagine you have the top of a drum, and that top of a drum is still at the start, but then you tap it, and it slowly reverberates out to the sides, and then comes back, and then at that point, it equalizes and returns back to stillness. This is exactly how energy moves through a system. At the center of what we call a torsion field, there's a point of stillness that center point rests upon. That center point, when that energy slowly makes its way to that center point, it loses all of its up and down momentum or its vibration, and then translates that into an inverse of its movement. But that brief moment where there's a inversion, it returns to stillness. However, when it does that, it becomes a series of compressions that move out in a spherical fashion. These compressions or pressure waves then coalesce and then add up until they reach the boundary of whatever we're talking about. Whether we're talking about a torsion field of a localized space like a plasma, or a star or a planet, it hits the outer boundary, which is commonly called a double layer in plasma physics, or that outside wall, whatever you want to call it, and then it rebounds back in. Slowly, those longitudinal compression waves create more interference with each other until they again give rise to more vibration. So this is a common feature amongst all things in the universe, and it continues to happen over and over again. However, when we say you need to raise your vibration or raise your frequency, what we're really saying is you need to get yourself in a state where you're vibrating in resonance with harmonic structures that are beneficial to ourselves. So if you imagine that there are negative entities and positive entities out there, what their differences are is that one is vibrating at a higher rate or a frequency that's more in line with positive emotions versus ones that are operating in a slower vibratory rate, which are more in line with physical matter and physical expressions and lower emotions like sadness, anger, and grief. This is really the only difference between entities that are disincarnated, what we call angels and demons. So how this relates to how we can actually feel our emotions and work with these vibrations is that each one of our emotions actually have their own frequency in which they operate on. And while when you stop and think about this might actually not be a surprise, the key here is recognizing it in the moment. For instance, I'm sure that when many of you have experienced stints of anger, I know personally that when I'm angry, the easiest way to get rid of it is just to have one quick burst and let that out. Whether that be hitting something or, yelling. Once I get that burst of anger out, it's pretty much smooth sailing from there. Yeah, I'll be agitated or whatever, the remnants of it. But anger is a very fast vibratory pattern in which it wants to go in and break something up. The adage or the story of when Jesus went into the temple and threw the money exchangers out of the temple comes to mind. He uses targeted anger to disrupt patterns and force them back into coherence or a state in which was harmonious. This is a great example of how you can use what we call negative emotions to restore order and maintain structure when something needs to, have a boundary put up, which is what anger really is for. But in the modern era, it gets twisted into being angry about not getting something you just kind of wanted or, something silly happens. Likewise, happiness is a much similar emotion, but it moves at a much more graceful pace. So happiness can be felt and be in tune with other beings that are more harmonious with their environment, like angels. And they will typically maintain that vibratory state as their base level because they are in connection with the universe. So when you look at emotions like happiness, it's a much slower pattern with not such high peaks as anger, but it creates like a platform for you to build upon. Dan Winter has done a lot of work with looking at the coherence of the heart. He actually has a website called realheartcoherence.com, and that website and his websites just detail how when you look at the frequencies of these different emotions, they behave just like you would expect. Anger is that sharp spike. Happiness or joy is that slow platform you can build upon. And these signatures represent basically how you feel these emotions in the body. And what's interesting about emotions like joy or love is that they closely resemble the pattern of the phi ratio or the golden ratio. This ratio or pattern is a great way to cut through energetic signatures and maintain a sense of yin and yang, because when you have one frequency goes 0.618 this way, you have the other one go the opposite way, 0.618, you constantly drill down into lower and lower frequencies of reality. And that's why I think that people who are in states of bliss or in states of resonance with high spiritual loftiness or being in tune with the universe, they tend to contact these more angelic beings. Because if you really think about it, the more negative or denser beings will be closer to physical matter. So if you look at, going back to the example of how when these compression waves slowly compress and create more and more compression, what's happening after a frequency hits that center point, it comes down and they dial up on each other, and they get smaller and smaller, and then become compression waves. They continuously stack more and more compression on top of each other. And you can think of these higher realms of reality, or heaven, or as is commonly called in theosophy, Devachan, as being within our reality, but at scales that we can't really touch physically. It makes sense that you would have positive beings who are more joyous in their natural expression at a smaller scale than the more dense beings who would sit closer to matter or physical expressions. And that's why when people are fearful or angry or in a state of being associated with the more dense aspects of reality, matter, you're hearing people who have these negative experiences where they communicate with demons, or they are dealing with Satan, or whatever they want to call it. But really, they're dealing with disincarnated entities who sit at a much lower frequency spectrum than these lofty angelic beings. And if you understand this and understand that there are different intelligences that sit at different scales of reality or different harmonic frequencies, it becomes pretty clear that what people have been talking about is by raising your vibration, you're getting yourself away from these more demonic or negative entities and moving towards a more harmonious angelic frequency or set of beings that encourage your growth, as opposed to trying to drag you back down so that they can resonate with your energy as you're putting out these different expressions or emotions. So it's not hard to imagine that when a being such as like a negative entity or negative being is picking up on a human being who's going through a rough time and is really associating with that sadness or that anger, it makes sense that they would come along and sort of poke at us to try to get more energy out of us, because misery likes company. And a lot of spiritual teachings talk about how there are beings that didn't really make it through the cut to the next stage of their evolution and kind of got stuck here on the earth plane with us. And they're not really alive, so to say, or dead, but they're just disincarnated, existing sort of in between our reality and the next harmonic frequency, or just whatever layer you want to call it, Devachan, whatever. They're in this limbo, and the best way for them to get out of it is to either go within and raise their base frequency, or to continue to exist in that lower state of energy and continue to poke us and agitate us. This is actually the source of what people call satanic forces or demonic forces. There are these entities that are stuck, not wanting to evolve further, and are trying to set up a home base here within our reality where they use us as energy to feed upon, or to utilize as they can continue their negative expressions of maintaining in these low energetic states. And it makes sense that they would do things like influence our world leaders, or try to get us, when we're already in a negative headspace, into a more negative headspace so they can get more energy, and also get us to look at the world in a more material sense. Because if we, en masse, move on beyond these lower frequency states, they don't have anything else to feed on. They don't have anywhere else to go, and they become stuck by themselves and then have to do a lot of internal work to move on to that next level. So when you hear people talk about say things like he's possessed by Satan, what they're saying is that they are obsessed with working with these negative energies so they can better themselves, as opposed to, raising up the collective. And that when people make these blood sacrifices to these demonic entities, what they're doing is they're literally, as the word has been used, loosh. They're providing loosh to these beings so that they think they're getting something in return, but really they're just dragging themselves further and further into negative expressions. So when you look at this in this way, it kind of blurs the line between what's positive and what's negative, what's really happening here. And it's moving towards an idea that everything is an individuated expression of the one universe, and that we're all trying to reach a point of stillness in which we can move back into unity with everything. And there's just different pockets or different layers of us, whether we're in a body or not, working towards that goal of unifying with the universe again and getting rid of that agitation or vibration and making it more harmonious, so that when we do operate again as physical or incarnated beings, we are working in a more harmonious fashion. So with that in mind, I think it's good to want to remain in these elevated states more often than not. And while when they say raise your vibration, it does sound like a lot of woo-woo a lot of the time, but the message is actually pretty good there. It's get yourself out of that negative headspace and remember that you can access joy just by remembering how it feels and bringing that vibratory pattern back to your core and allowing it to manifest. And yeah, with that, I think this also explains a lot of the different geometric patterns that have been floating around in different mystical teachings, like the Merkaba or the star tetrahedron or the flower of life. All of these are ways to show that energy can create a harmonious pattern at its center and then maintain it. Because if you look at something like the star tetrahedron, it's taking energy from the top and the bottom and then bringing it into the center, where it's creating a core and holding on to that energy. And when you look at the 3D version, which we call the Merkaba, it's the same thing. You're bringing energy from the crown chakra, the root chakra, and then trying to bring it into the heart so that you can maintain a harmonious connection to the universe by bringing the energy from the earth and the energy from the stars into coherence inside of ourselves. And yeah, so that was this video. I kind of went through it a little faster than I thought I would. With that, I'm probably going to edit this at some point and put it up with some graphics and explain this stuff a little more, probably in a couple days. But I would love to open this up to questions. And hi Heather, I see you. And hi everyone. Hi Jim. Hi Benjamin, if you're still with us. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to dive into that. What do I know of the monad? Well, if I'm being honest, I have had several visions of it. It's, and from my perspective, sits above us and it's sort of beaming down. Like, I don't want to say instructions or like codes because that makes everything seem so black and white. I think it's beaming down potential and direction of ways we could go. In theosophy, they talk about the monad being the many expressions of the one being, the one creator, if you will, and they talk about how it's basically the multifaceted expression of God. Yeah. And when I did see it like many of the different depictions of it by the monks and all the people who have been drawing it for forever, with it being concentric rings of different layers of colors and actually beings sitting within each ring looking down at us. Oh, I just got chills. Yeah. And I guess you could say that the monad is actually the frequency or vibration that we kind of want to get in line with. Um, and that ultimate center point would be sort of the stillness that we're looking to return to, that center point at the top and middle of the monad. Thank you. That was a great question. Also, I want to say that I have plasma astrology, or which is based on esoteric astrology readings going on right now. I have a new mini offering where you can get any one question answered for just $39. I'll do a video and send it to you covering the placements that impact that, and then also the question. I also have a workshop coming up, which I'm very excited to give, coming up in November. And that's going to be great. It's going to be live. It's going to be around 5 hours. And I'm going to cover all of this from vibration all the way to literally how consciousness works and like where we're going as human beings. We'll look at the technology that's coming. We'll look at where we are now. We'll look at how you can think of consciousness and how it ties into spiritual thinking. Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited for it. Yeah. So I know that I actually have the workshops detailed here. So I go over, we're going to start with stillness and the quantum threshold. Again, how you can return to that still point and maintain that still point and understand that it's from that absolute center point, which is commonly shared amongst everything that has a center, or everything, that things even arise from. Thank you. The third eye ties into this in the sense that if you think about how we have two brain hemispheres, and I know people say that the pineal gland is often the third eye. I think it's a little more complex than that. I think it's more that in between our two brain hemispheres, there's a small gap, which you could think of as a spark gap, and that when you understand that consciousness is like the contrasting of outside to the inside of ourselves, or whatever is conscious, that when you have the brain operating in a way that the right and left hemispheres are communicating in a coherent manner, they start to vibrate in sync with each other, and then that's when inner vision will start to open, and the third eye becomes more experiential, and you can actually see through it. And when we get back to that little gap in between the brain hemispheres, when it is actually in frequency or harmonic resonance with each other, just like how when a spark plug has that spark come out of it, that center point is where energy inverts and compresses. So like when we're in harmony, that's when the third eye becomes more active and more clear for us to see through. Yep, exactly. With the right hemisphere, and yeah, I like that. So you could think of different colors. That's great. I like that. Thank you. I agree. Like once you start exploring, like how, like our whole body is set up this way. Like there's gaps between our neurons, and that's basically where like again that still point is where everything returns to. So like the gaps between our neurons themselves are where like our soul or our spirit inhabit, and like are getting reports from our brain, and then also we can feed ideas into it. So like the whole body's set up this way. They're finding that in between cells there are gaps, so the cells can actually transfer ions between the two and send information, and get them to understand like what needs to happen in the body. And then it gets deeper than that too when you start looking at the geometry of like how calcium organizes itself in the body, and then how water molecules will actually surround the calcium and create bubbles of energy. Basically, we have little tiny balls of stars in our all throughout our body. I would say three eye atlas is interesting. I right now the powers that be are so interested in maintaining the world order that they are like throwing everything at the wall. So like I can't really get a good read on what actually three eye atlas is. When you look at like where it came from and the trajectory it's got, it does look like it's from outside our solar system, which is pretty amazing. I will say that any advanced species would understand what we're talking about here, and would understand that you could actually just compress something down to, it could be compress something down to very small scales of reality, and then like in the Marvel movies like Ant-Man, you could ride the quantum field or the longitudinal aspect of the electromagnetic field to wherever you wanted to go, and then just pop out. So in a sense, they basically are teleporting or doing like a warp drive in Star Trek, except that instead of moving extremely fast, they would shrink themselves down to subatomic scales and then pop back out. And basically riding within frequencies. It could be the creators coming back. It could also be like these intelligences, which I'm of the idea that whatever created us or influenced the formation of these physical bodies that we call human beings, or basically created the energetic pattern that our cells build upon to allow such crazy things to happen, like a soul inhabiting it. They could be sending stuff like this into the solar system or whatever to wake us up. because I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and if you imagine, like, let's say you created a species or encouraged a chimp-like organism to suddenly stand up straight and then be disconnected from the energetic field of its planet by standing up at a 90-degree angle to its horizon. Uh, it wouldn't be beneficial to show up one day and be like, hey, look, guys, this is what you should be doing. And then be an example of like a higher life form, because you would quickly become that organism's god. And if your whole goal is to have something that resembles yourself on a planet which matter moves slowly, like here on the Earth, you would want to encourage them to discover all these things themselves and understand that they are just as equal to you as you are to the sun. It's just all different expressions of the one being, the creator or the universe, in different expressions. So I think that is probably the more likely explanation. It could be just random comets, but I have a hard time seeing how a comet would get through the outer layer of our solar system without being completely obliterated, without some help. So yeah. I mean, there's even if we look at it from a material perspective, there's so many asteroids and comets and meteors and dwarf planets beyond Pluto and stuff that, like, a comet making it all the way here by Mars is kind of crazy. It also, from the energetic patterns, shows a lot of similarities to being like a plasma or a plasmoid and maintaining its structure here inside our solar system, which is also just as impressive, because getting all the way here from the outer regions of space is very improbable, I think. Yeah, I agree. Um, so yeah, the question is, when the object came in, or the comment is, when the object came into our space, the planet's frequency started to change, and animals started acting a little weirder, and it's showing us that we have to raise our frequency, and that everything on Earth, in order to survive, is going to have to change its base frequency from these lower vibrations to, higher ones. And honestly, that lines up really well with the spiritual understandings or religious from, like, Hinduism, Buddhism, esoteric Christianity. It all points to us becoming more conscious examples of the one being, the one creator. Theosophy has a whole detailed list of how this is going to happen and what we're going to end up being. And we're like halfway through the modern era, and that's why everything is so crazy right now. And modern era, by modern era, I mean we're at the bridge point between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. So we're like right in that center point. So we have a lot of old structures from the Piscean era trying to hold on to their control and being like religion, dogma, and then we have the new era, Aquarius, being like, no, it's group focus. It's understanding the God within and how it exists within everyone and everything, and understanding that Christ is that center point which everything holds. Everything from a blade of grass to ourselves. It's just the amount of consciousness that an individual has that they can work with that Christ point. I haven't really tied in Nibiru or the Kachinas, but no, I remember you're talking about the blue Kachina is that blue orb or plasma. I don't really say a plasma, but that blue meteor or whatever is supposed to appear in the sky at a certain point, and that actually did show up a few years ago. So that's interesting. I didn't think about that. Not for a while. Thank you. I want to also start doing live streams at least two times a week. Yeah, but as I probably should have put in this original video, the more you get into this stuff and the more you want to share it, the more these negative beings start to latch on to your like underlying subconscious beliefs and start to agitate you and like just put roadblocks or perceived roadblocks in the way, and sometimes it gets a little hard to do that. But no, I want to start doing this twice a week, because this is kind of fun. This is fun. We should try doing one together and try out these collaboration features. Because when we first talked about this, they didn't have that. So now I think we can actually. I'm talking to Stella Realms, Heather. Okay, that sounds great. But now I think we can actually maybe go live together on our channels, and then that way not one of us is getting like all the traffic, um, which could be cool. Yeah, we'll talk and figure this out. I feel like I should have something else to say here. I mean, I can get back into the workshop. Okay, yeah, we'll talk. Cool. Thank you. So I get a lot of it from. The question is like, where do I get this info from? So I get a lot of it from like just studying. I have a background in computer science, so I already think in systems and like how things tie together. Um, Thank you. And so like I already think in systems, and then once I've learned that everything has a common energetic geometry, the torsion field, and then I learned that when energy reaches that center point and it has no more up and down momentum, it for a brief moment it like cancels, it inverts, and then comes out the other side. And that point when it inverts, it starts to create pressure waves that move throughout the entire universe. Everything I've been learning about religion, spirituality, heaven, hell, all these things, how people have visions, all this stuff, it all started to make sense. It started to click. And like, I get a lot of my original information I got from Dan Winter, who, like me, has great pattern recognition, and sees these things pretty much everywhere. And then when you start digging into things like plasma physics, you see that these same topics are everywhere, whether it be through Fibonacci ratio and stuff like that. It's everywhere. And like it's just once you see the pattern, you see, oh, it's a series of these patterns, energetic signatures, torsion fields, double layers, whatever you want to call them, just stacked on top of each other, creating fractals or self-similarity throughout the entire universe. So it all kind of like gives legitimacy to like ancient spiritual topics or theosophy or whatever. They're all talking about seeing these structures within their mind's eye and then translating it into words or different lines of thought like Kabbalah or Hinduism or Buddhism. It's all really just talking about interacting with these greater structures beyond ourselves. And I'm not saying that like everything is made out of plasma or whatever. I'm saying that like as we understand it, plasma is like the shadow of what these greater things are. Are you saying the symptoms are of pressure waves? I'd say that when that what we call transverse waves, or like the electron or energy or matter, has to cycle through the center of anything, like a torsion field or even an atom, atom. It has to because at the other side it inverts. So like it comes in this way, and then at the other center point it inverts, and then that brief moment is where that momentum becomes flat, and then it implodes, and that brief moment of implosion is when things start to become pressure waves. It's actually what causes earthquakes here on the Earth. Is when the Earth does it, it sends out what we call P waves, which are pressure waves that move up through the core into the crust and into the ocean, or just ground, and then that creates disturbances in the air, which then causes the wind, and then pressure waves. Okay, so then that it's basically everything. Is that when something implodes at its center and it loses the up and down momentum, because energy can't be destroyed or created, it gets translated into compression, as opposed to up and down. That brief second, what can be compressed gets compressed and distributed, and then what can't gets created as heat and energy that is like volatile. So that's like why our computers get hot when they're running really, like doing a lot of things, is because we're not efficiently compressing energy on those different pins and parts of the processor, so it gets exerted as heat, which is inefficient compression. And that's why you need to have quantum computers at such a cold temperature, so that they can use those pressure waves instead of creating a bunch of heat, which we call interference. And then they can have different layers of that compression working within each other and having different signals all at one place. I think that was a bad explanation, but yeah. And then you could also think of like angelic beings, and then also like demonic beings, as being contained within those different pressure waves, because they can stack on top of each other. Just like when the ocean crests on the shore and then slides back in, the sea foam that's already there now becomes interactive with the new sea foam that came from when the water hit the shore. So it can stack all the way down to the bed of the ocean, as those different pressure waves. And you can have the same thing in 3D space all the way down and below the subatomic scale. So like when you hear people talk about how human beings are quantum, they're saying that we're interacting with that subatomic layer of compression constantly. Or stillness, as I like to call it. But yeah, if there's any more questions, please feel free. I'm going to keep going into what the workshop is. So the first one is lost because I can't find the document anymore. The first one is about stillness and standing waves. We talk about how everything returns to stillness. The second one is about how that stillness and compression What were you saying was manifested by the compression waves? Yes. So you have to think of it. So just like how I mentioned that when the Earth takes in energy through its poles and which is coming from this interaction with the sun and then also rest of space and planets, it comes down and it reaches the core of the planet, and then it loses its up and down momentum, and then it compresses until it can't anymore, and then before that inversion of energy comes out the south pole, it creates pressure waves or P waves that go through the crust. And then just like how the ocean, the waves on the ocean, like tsunamis, are created from those pressure waves pushing up on the water and then like having a drop immediately, and that creates a tsunami. This is much in the same way, except for if you think about how these compression waves spread out from the central point of whatever we're talking about, let's say a ball of energy, and it ripples out, and then over time, different compression waves are coming from different angles. So, like, let's say you have one going this way and one going this way. Over time, as they hit that outward boundary, like the ionosphere of the planet, or it was commonly called a double layer in plasma physics, they will eventually coalesce to the point where one's coming at this angle, one's coming from this angle, and then over time, those compression waves will get their own sense of vorticity that slowly arise back up and create up and down waves within the discrete reality. So, like, what ends up happening is that these, and I think this is quantum mechanics, this compression then creates more spin, and that spin creates agitation, and then that becomes physical matter or, discrete structures. So, like, this underlying substrate of reality, as it gets more and more compressed, eventually creates more structures. And if you keep this in mind, and then think about how we talk about when you die, you've got to work out your karma, and then you come back to rework out that karma. What's happening, perhaps, is that when we die and we lose our connection to like the physical matter, which is basically trapped vibration into atoms that all stack on top of each other. And once we move out of that and back into the subatomic planes of reality, or the compression waves, over time, as we get more and more refined and ready for our next incarnation, those compression waves, as they spread out through the entire universe, will slowly find each other again through harmonic resonance, and then eventually get to the point where we're ready to go back into 3D matter to work out our karma, which is those agitations and those compression waves as they weren't able to be compressed purely when we were alive. Again, it comes back to like how computers produce a bunch of heat because they're not running efficiently. When we have karma, we have to work out. It means that we've left agitation here on the earth that we need to eventually bring back to stillness. I feel like I explained that very poorly. I've got a great analogy using a tablecloth, though, that I've been waiting to do. Where like the table is the base of reality, and the tablecloth is like us. And then if you bunch it up and then move it along the table, it's a single piece of that tablecloth. And then when we die, we just go back flat. But there's like ripples, and slowly those ripples come back to each other and create another bunch in the tablecloth that moves along until again comes flat again, if that makes sense. I hope that answered your question too, because go a little in there, into the weeds, as they say. I might as well just continue with what's in the workshop. So the first one's about stillness and the quantum threshold of reality. We're talking about that still point and how everything compresses out there and actually eventually gives rise to everything. The workshop 2 is about these fractal components of our reality, the fields and the blueprint of consciousness. We'll talk about how by maintaining a center point of your energetic structure in relationship to the rest of the universe, you become a conscious agent. And cells themselves do this. Whole human beings do this. Planets, stars, all of them are just different scales of that same concept, keeping one's self alive in relationship to the rest of the universe. Then we're going to go into what that process is, individuation, how this ties into what Christ was saying we need to do, or Jesus was saying we need to do, and how humanity is eventually going to have to understand that as the more conscious agents of physical matter here on the earth, it's our job to shepherd along the rest of the planet and help it rise up to discover its own path towards individuation and unity with the universe, the creator, one being, over time. And then we're going to look at like how human beings went from being in Lemuria to Atlantis to the current era to the next stage in like 1,000 years, and then the stage after that, which seems crazy, and like the goal of the species in general. And then the final workshop is that future of humanity, like the imminent future, the coming decades, the centuries after that, to the point where we're going to talk about the end of the Aquarian age and where we should be then, what consciousness should look like then. We're also going to look at some of the technology that all of this allows and the concepts that are now starting to play out, which is actually shown in most of the Marvel movies or the comic book movies. We're going to talk about how theosophy and different lines of spiritual thinking have been talking about how there's going to be a new type of human being born in human design. Those of you familiar with that, they talk about how in 2027 there's going to be a new type of human being born, and how it's kind of crazy that that's all lining up from a prediction made in the 80s. We're going to talk about how AI is going to tie in here. We're going to talk about the limitations of AI, the ways we can beat those limitations. Yeah. And then the final hour will be just a meditation and then open for questions and discussion. And if anyone who's watching is interested and hasn't signed up for my newsletter on my website, I'm sending out reminders on that as well as details on that. And you can also get to a landing page from my website, adamweichel.com, and see the whole layout of what the workshop's going to be. And again, I also offer esoteric or plasma astrology readings. They're kind of the same thing. I'm just trying to up esoteric astrology to the point where it's talking about plasma structures, and how they implode at their center and share this compression with us energy. And also I have a mini offer that, it allows you to ask one question and doesn't cost too much and is less time consuming and something you can just get done in 10-15 minutes. This is great. I think I'm going to start doing a question and answer session at least once a week because this is fun. And then when I get these questions, I immediately start getting ideas of what's going on here. And then I kind of formulate ideas that I've had but never really vocalized or wrote down. So it's pretty great. I enjoy it. Thank you, everyone. That makes me so happy, Garrett. Thank you. He's talking about how the tablecloth analogy came together. I really want to do a video of the like using it. I just have to get a tablecloth because when I came up with this is at my parents' house, and B, I need to move the camera and stuff, which I guess isn't a big deal. But I just need to get a tablecloth and set up an area to do it, and do it. Yeah, yeah. And that's like when the tablecloth goes flat after like an incarnation and then reverberates around like you gotta remember it's like a sphere or 360 degrees, or I guess 1080 because it's spherical. So it's like all around the universe these compression waves are slowly over time trying to find each other again, so we're ready to incarnate again. And then like when we don't have any karma, that's when we become angels or archangels or disincarnated beings or beings that exist outside time and space. And that's where we're all moving. Every single one of us. Which gets me to a question from my last video where someone asked, I said that it's more restrictive to be a plasma being or whatever. And that's what I'm saying is like, if you exist as a bundle of compression, then all the other ones, it becomes less about like what you want to do and physically doing it with energy and more about negotiating with other entities or beings or energies or compressions, angels, on how you're going to do it. So it becomes like a very communicative dance as opposed to just like brute forcing through things like we're doing today. Because like let's imagine there's a plasma being in front of me. There probably is. It's weird, but there probably is something in front of me. Like me doing this, they have to either I'm pushing them out of the way, they're either helping me move this way, or they're like just being like broken up and then having to reform. So it's yeah, that's a different but also just as challenging existence, I guess. And I will definitely do the Q&A. I would love to. Yeah. So with that, unless anyone has any more questions, it's been about an hour. Now that I know these go well, I'm going to definitely do this. I'm going to definitely come up with some more activities or topics to talk about so we can definitely dive into this more. I've got a lot of ideas, and now that this is picking momentum, I'm going to do them. So yeah. So I'll hold on for a little bit if anyone has any questions. If you guys do come up with anything afterwards, feel free to leave a comment on the video or reach out to me at my email address, adam@adamweichel.com. Yeah. I don't know why, but I feel like I should say David is my middle name. So I've had a couple people get confused when they come to my website and it's Adam Weichel. So it's Adam David Weichel. Yeah. Right. So yeah. Thank you again, everyone. Like I said, I'm probably gonna leave this up for a couple days. I might just leave this up indefinitely, and then cut this up into a better video with some pictures, images that show this. Thank you again. And feel free to reach out. I also have the Telegram community. I'm trying to get going, so thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. But yeah, feel free to join the Telegram community or whatever. And if you feel like supporting my work, anything helps. Thank you. See you guys soon. Thanks.